Alright, three entirely different movies to talk about this week. Obviously, we're going to start with the really big one, and by really big one, we mean, obviously, potentially one of the biggest ever of all time in movie history, etc. So we're going to start with Avengers Endgame, which I would say finally, but it at the same time also kind of feels like we just talked about Infinity War, so it almost feels like it got here kind of quickly, but um, it is worth noting that I was able to miraculously make it to this without really knowing anything. I hadn't heard anything, nothing had been given away, I didn't see trailers, I didn't see TV spots, I maybe saw one or two stills, that was about it. And obviously, much like with Infinity War, and with how much they've been keeping everything as secret as humanly possible, we're just gonna do like what we did with Infinity War and just kind of go through the whole thing. So obviously, spoilers will be written in the title, probably in the description also. So yeah, we're just gonna obviously to even say what the first scene is would be a spoiler. So why not just say spoilers all the way through? So we're gonna talk about everything all the way to the end. So there's that. So this opening scene, the cold open before we get the Marvel Studios logo, is immediately taking us in one of the directions we did not go in, or we only talked about going in Infinity War, and that's where Hawkeye was during this. So obviously we know he's still got the house arrest thing going on, but it was one of those cases where because you're thrust into it immediately before you get any kind of logo whatsoever, it's always fun to watch Marvel movies in a packed theater because you hear some of the people the people who still aren't used to it and aren't sure if this is the movie or not. Yeah, so being thrust into it that quickly, the mind is just going to kind of constantly be racing. So immediately I'm trying to figure out if this is before or after. When it's pretty obvious and it's revealed very quickly that this is right before the snap affects Clint's family, taking everybody but himself. So, which is a really good opening because it was one of those things where I was wondering from the start what exactly the opening scene would be. I was almost thinking, as far as not knowing exactly where the people that were snapped, I guess you could say, went, because there was the whole thing I kept hearing about, there's the possibility they're trapped in the Soul Stone, is what I kept hearing, which we learned very, very quickly is not the case. But I almost thought they would kind of put that to rest immediately, and to throw everybody off, that's how it would, we would start somewhere, wherever they happen to be, with the people that were dusted in the snap at the end of Infinity War. But that is also not the case at all. There's a lot of things that I totally thought would be the case that are definitely not the case. I'm talking about kind of starting off in ways to kind of throw the audience off a little bit. So there is the whole thing where we basically, seems like we're ending the movie 15 minutes in. There was even a dude at the front of the theater that just yelled, "What?" Which in any other case would probably be seen as obnoxious, and we'd hate that guy. But I think that was a genuine reaction from that guy. With Thor chopping Thanos' head off in the first 15 minutes. And the interesting thing about this is what I was talking about before, where it's when you go into a movie like this, where there's just been non-stop theories for the past year, and the movie's got a 3-hour runtime, and anything is possible, and all that stuff. So every single time, and there's the whole thing of, it's almost surreal that we're even watching this, because it's surreal that we've gotten this far in this franchise, and the fact that we know for pretty much a fact that this is the end of it. Our minds are going to be really, really racing throughout this whole thing. So with our minds already all over the place trying to grab every single little thing, having Thor cut off Thanos' head in the first 15 minutes is practically an assault. because we're already feeling frantic in our heads regardless of how calm the scene is, because we know anything could happen and probably every little detail is going to be important in some way. and then you just throw that at us immediately, and then immediately top that off with the 5-year jump, which we're not expecting either. So it's like right away, you're constantly asking, okay, where the fuck is this going? Now, we all knew because of the... Well, interestingly enough, we all assumed there would be time travel in some sense, but not in the way we're given. I imagine most of us were thinking that the Time Stone would be what basically saved us, which, once again, is not the case. So, and it's kind of weird how crucial Ant-Man ends up being throughout this. I mean, obviously there was the Ant-Man theory, but there was also just like it was so interesting to see Ant-Man being played by Paul Rudd of all people, and then there's the whole because basically you get the vibe of because he's Paul Rudd, the character was typically funny. The Ant-Man movies were a lot more light than the other recent ones we've been getting. So it was really interesting to watch throughout the whole movie and see Ant-Man like almost. I mean, in charge is a strong way to put it, but the fact that his knowledge in this is so incredibly crucial, and how much they have to listen to him to know exactly what they're doing in order to save the universe, which ultimately is because of the luck of a rat that happened to be walking in the right place that we even have Scott in this story at all. And the really interesting thing about getting this portion of Scott's story and the fact that he doesn't come out till after the 5-year gap is that obviously the whole thing's going to have this really apocalyptic vibe because of everything that's happened. I talked recently about how much I love the second post-credit scene in Ant-Man and the Wasp, where it's just the quiet and we just hear the TV with like the emergency signal going off. And yeah, and it's basically Scott's basically Cillian Murphy in 28 Days Later once he gets out back into the public, or what's left of the public. And the whole, we already went in knowing the whole movie was going to have that vibe, but this whole thing with Scott where not only is it this way for him, but he has no idea what's happened or how much time has passed. So it's like a totally different situation as far as he's concerned. So anything we get from his point of view at the start is really interesting and a really interesting way to go. And his interaction with his daughter is like a really beautiful and heartbreaking moment at the same time. But then, talking about heartbreaking, we do have this opening with one interaction that I never realized how much I really wanted it until I was looking at it was Tony and Nebula, especially playing paper football. But there's also something about Downey in this whole opening scene. I mean, the whole movie, but particularly everything before the time jump, where you talk about these movies and the fact that they're, a lot of people dismiss them as just comic book movies and all that. Which to an extent they are, even despite the fact that this whole franchise is one of the most impressive endeavors in movie history, which I don't think anybody would dispute. Even people that don't like the movies have to see the big picture here and how impressive it is that we got here. But the level of acting that Downey has put into this franchise through the whole thing is something that I don't think is going to get near the credit that it deserves. Because I know around the time Civil War happened, he did kind of stand out to people, and people were like, "Wow, Downey's like legitimately acting in this." But it's really been consistent, particularly with his character. Because we already saw that his character was relatively complex at the start in like the very first movie. But then as it's gone on, everything post the first Avengers movie, when he's the one that's really dealing with the PTSD of the whole situation. And then you've got, when we get to Civil War, not only does he have the PTSD, but he's also got, he's got the dad issues, which have been consistent throughout. But then there's also the whole guilt factor of what happened in Sokovia that really pushes him through that movie. And then you've got the whole thing where him basically bringing up Peter in Homecoming, the awesome scene where he steps out of the suit and all that. And also the whole thing about him and Cap's falling out that we see a little bit in Age of Ultron and then pretty much all the way through Civil War, and then it continues in this also. He's just really brought it in a way that you would probably not expect in these kind of... Like, it always throws me off when I forget just how really damn good he is in these. And, of course, as you would expect, in this particular movie, he has to go to, like, all other levels. And we obviously saw, you know, hints of it at the end of Infinity War when Peter disappeared before his eyes and all that, and all the many times he's been this close to death. And he's also, the very opening of this movie is him feeling like he's looking into the face of death, like, as he speaks, before Captain Marvel saves them. But as it goes on, like, when he gets off the ship and he sees Cavigan for the first time, and he mentions that he lost Peter, is kind of the moment where you, I mean, obviously the whole message thing, but it's the moment where you really realize just how far gone Tony has gone in regards to how down he can possibly go. And then just everything after this, whether it be the arguments with Steve or him talking about how far this has gone, how they've lost everything, all that, just feels so incredibly... It's a large reason this material works as well as it does, because it would be... Like, you see, you know, the big aliens, and you see all the battles and all that, and the... whatever else. The really, you know, fantastical comic booky stuff. But it's this performance by Downey that just feels like it grounds everything, and really gives... I mean, there's a lot of things in the franchise that do that, but I think this is the one that, like, really comes forward and really makes it feel like this... It adds, like, a weird kind of realism to it because of how authentic his performance is in these larger-than-life comic book situations. So I can't, obviously, you know, praise that any more than I already have. And then obviously that's also brought on the ordeal of him now having, in the 5-year gap, he and Pepper had a child. I do like that they stuck with the name Morgan, which he very briefly talked about in his first scene in Infinity War. And then that's a whole other performance in itself, where we've got Tony Stark, the dad now, who seems to be an amazing father from the little bit that we see of it. And then that's before all the shit goes down. So, obviously, as it's been alluded to, this is a situation that can only be solved by time travel. And when I was wondering if that was going to be maybe the climax was going to have something to do with that, and it was going to be like kind of that's where we ended, was them doing the whole time travel thing, and then whatever happens happens. But it's a large portion of the movie. Like, this could easily be classified in one degree or another as a time travel movie, and Lord knows they reference everyone under the sun intentionally. But when I realized just how crucial the time travel element was going to be, how it was like a large fraction of the movie, like most of it, my first thought was, oh shit. But not because it's an illogical step, and not because I don't feel like it's not because I think it, you know, doesn't fit or something. Because we were all expecting it in some sense or another. The main reason I said, oh shit, to it basically being a time travel movie is... So, it's going to be one of those movies that's just nitpicked to death by everybody, because every single time you bring time travel into a movie, that's all fucking people want to talk about, is the science of time travel that doesn't fucking exist. And they'll just want to argue that all day and say, oh, the movie has plot holes because this and this and this all relating to the time travel, and that's all people are going to pay attention to. When, much like something like Looper, when we have the scene where Bruce Willis says, we're not going to talk about the science of it because we'd be here all fucking day, we're going to make our own rules, and that's just what it's going to be, which is basically what they do. And people just have to live with it, and either you go with it or you don't. And I felt bad for the movie because I was just immediately annoyed thinking about that, when I realized how much of it was going to be a time travel movie. But for the most part, it works just fine for me, especially with how much fun they have with it, which I think is the kind of more important thing here in regards to the creativity they use by going back to the other movies. Even if I'm, like I said, I've been getting really sick of Back to the Future references and putting time travel in movies with Teen Titans Go to the Movies and Lego Movie 2. It seems like fucking everything is doing it now. But this is the one case where it's like, I feel like they made the most of it, like much more than movies have recently with the time travel aspect of it. Especially with, instead of just kind of going straight back to the movies, because obviously this is something we've seen many times over. Obviously, the easy one is Back to the Future 2, where it was them going back to the previous movies. This goes all the way to, like, the Santa Claus 3 did this. But the way they do this, where not only do we go back to the scenes that we know, but the way they bring all the actors back to expand on those, and we see, like, how a lot of the scenes we saw before in the franchise went after the fact. I don't know why, but it kind of blew my mind that they got Robert Redford to come back. Because apparently he was there after the whole Avengers thing, which is great. And we have Frank Grillo and Sitwell come back also, where we set up the whole... Even though it's the end of the first Avengers movie, we get the scene that feels like it's the callback to the Winter Soldier elevator scene, with that amazing payoff. I also wondered if it was like a reference to, wasn't there, I have no, like, my knowledge of the comics in this area is almost practically non-existent, but I feel like I heard something recently about there being, like, a really controversial comic that ended with Captain America saying "Hail Hydra," and I wondered if it was also, like, a loose reference to that, which is really nice. But then you've also got the stuff where there's the whole kind of closure aspect where we get the scene with Thor and Rene Russo again. And the fact that they could have probably expanded on this, like, a lot more. Like, we see, you know, Thor have the scene with Rene Russo, but it's like he could have also had a scene with Odin, he could have had a scene with Loki, he could have had a scene with Heimdall, all these people that are gone. But the fact that they clearly had to, like, pick and choose, especially since time is of the essence, I thought it was really nice that it was Rene Russo that he got the scene with. And then the same thing for a lot of them. I think, surely to God, I am not alone in how psyched I was that we got to see Ebony Maw again. After he, unfortunately, left Infinity War so early, after being such a badass villain, that we got more of him. I don't think he was as badass in this as he was in Infinity War, but just his presence again. Proxima Midnight was oddly missing, but I don't know. So, like I said, I guess they would pick and choose with their characters, but they did, for the most part, bring back everybody they needed to, even if it was just for a really small moment. It just really felt like made the franchise feel whole. So without making it feel like it was too packed or anything like that, which I've praised this franchise over and over and over and over again for being able to make them actually as packed as possible, but without them feeling like there's too much going on, like everything. Like, they're able to put everything in here that needs to be to feel like everything from every movie is here in some way, which you would think would just be absolutely a recipe for just overkill and overabundance, and especially with the 3-hour runtime, you would think this. But it's what Marcus and Mafila do with these scripts. I have no idea how. I have no idea how this happens. But yeah, it continues to be amazing. And there's also the mixing of the characters too when they did this. Like, when we have, like, Rhodes in Guardians of the Galaxy, and Rocket in Thor: The Dark World chasing after Natalie Portman, is hilarious. So, so yeah, and that whole, like I said, just being able to just keep the creativity going by doing this concept that we have seen before, but just constantly finding ways to keep it alive, eventually getting to the point where the whole Captain America running into himself thing. And I love just how jaded Cap is these days, and I love that, because one of my least favorite jokes in these movies was the joke in Age of Ultron that I thought they really dragged out, where I think it was Tony screamed shit and then Cap said language, and it was just kind of, I mean, it was in character, but it was kind of lame too. but that now has the ultimate comeback where the movie begins with Cap saying, you know, let's get this son of a bitch, and then eventually, you've got to be shitting me when he runs into his old self. And so I love that also. And then, talking about the way some characters' worlds have changed up to this point, and without feeling like a cop, there's a lot of things that happen in this movie without feeling like a cop-out. Sort of like, the whole thing with Thanos at the beginning, where what we really, really came here for was to see them battle Thanos as hard as possible. And it sort of feels like we're cheated of it when he's killed in the first 15 minutes, but at the same time, it's like we get that sort of the adrenaline that comes from that jolt of that expectation being killed right in front of us 15 minutes in, but we also get what we came here for, but they're equally satisfying without one feeling like a cop-out, which would have been really easy for that to happen. And another one of these is something that we were really building up was how much Thor has lost up to this point. Where, like we were just talking about, he lost his whole family, he lost his planet, everything. He lost an eye, he lost his hammer. And somehow, all these things managed to come back in some way. He gets the last interaction with Ray Russo, he gets the eye that Rocket gave him, he gets his hammer back when he goes back. And the fact that they have the new Asgard, where we still have Valkyrie and we still have Korg. And it's like, at a time in Infinity War where we thought that Thor had literally lost every single thing that he had, and the only thing that remained from the Thor world was Thor himself. And it's actually nice to see it, like, live on, in a way. Of sorts, where we still have Valkyrie, we still have Korg, they still have a place that they call Asgard, even if that's not really what it is, still. And it just kind of feels perfect without feeling like it's trying to be too soft on the characters, despite all the really dire shit that's happening to them. And also just some things they brought back, also, that I was happy to see. Just little things, like the fact that when Tony comes back after he's realized that this could work, and we get another scene of him driving like a fucking maniac, which I feel like we haven't seen since the second Iron Man movie. So that was nice to sort of call back to that also. And while we're on the subject of Iron Man 2, there was something else that kind of surprised me. When we did our whole MCU retrospective video last summer, one of the things I talked about was how much I hated Rhodes' comedic lines, and how much I loved Don Cheadle, but I kind of hated how his Rhodes was written, and how none of his comedy lines landed. Rhodes is really damn funny in this, particularly the strangling baby Thanos line, among many other things, and his reaction to Quill. So yeah, that was really nice to see also. And then there's stuff that's just interesting in regards to how they shot it, like whether it be Thanos' farm is basically Thanos in a Terrence Malick movie, or the really well done long take when we're reintroduced to Clint when he's killing everybody when Black Widow hunts him down. So, random stuff like that. I know these movies have been criticized before about how they're not particularly creatively shot, but stuff like that is appreciated when it is in there, so there is that. And the whole thing of another one of the callbacks, not really a callback, but the way Tony kind of picks a movie to call Thor, and how it started with Point Break, and now that he's gained weight and he's wearing the shitty clothes and he's got the glasses and his beard's longer, he calls him Lebowski, which I think is also really funny given Tony's history with Obadiah Stane. It's just it's just kind of a weird connotation, but yeah, so now that we've established all that, we can probably jump to the end, where I kind of thought I was going to be a tad disappointed and a tad underwhelmed, simply because when we got to the climax, and they just started having a throwdown with Thanos, and it was amazing. And it's like, holy shit, we're actually going to have a Marvel climax that's not a shitload of armies colliding with each other. Awesome. And then the armies showed up, but hold on. The great thing about that, though, is that my, oh, so we're doing this again thing was pretty short-lived, because even though that is what the climax is again, is armies colliding. There's a lot of stuff here. Like, there's a lot of different variants to it that make it much more exciting than the previous armies colliding scenes that we've seen. Whether it be, obviously we've got all the different returns, which is great, and this nice big epic moment for all of them. But then we've also got stuff like Valkyrie on her flying horse, which I'm sure has a more specific name in the comic book that I don't know. And then we get to see, we finally get to see Peter's instant kill and exactly how that works, after having it built up twice. And all of this going on, and it's just this big, massive, gigantic... It's one of those cases where it actually feels like what I feel like all the other giant battle scenes were supposed to feel like, and not just these movies, but other movies also, where it just really feels like this end-of-the-world collision, this end-of-the-world battle. It really, really actually feels like it. Even despite the fact that it's just a shitload of faces that are just kind of all mixed in the crowd, with people getting their individual moments. But it really is those individual moments that really pays off. Like the scene of Thanos and Captain Marvel fighting, where he rips off one of the stones so he can hit her just before she's about to take it from him. The little things like that are really what make the action scenes work, is the individual stuff. But there is a lot of that in here also, so... Obviously, that brings us to the ultimate singular moment in this battle, where what happened is something that I probably never would have guessed. I also may have been in denial, because this is something I really didn't want to happen prior, especially because I feel like everybody and their damn mother, including me, especially me, was under the impression, like, I would have bet just about anything that Cap was not going to make it out of this movie. I was thinking we were all under that impression. I don't know if it was the whole Chris Evans really saying, like, I hung up the suit, it's my very last time ever in the history of ever. I am no longer playing Captain America, ever. And given the fact that just where the position that Cap was in, he really didn't... He was the one that really, apart from Thor, really didn't have anything else. And it was... And the whole thing I was thinking was, yeah, so Cap's a war hero, or a war criminal, after Civil War, and that's the way everybody sees him. And then it was going to be, he was going to die defeating Thanos and save the universe, and his death defeating Thanos would make him a war hero again, is where I thought it was going. As far as the major ones that didn't make it, Black Widow was a surprise. That was one of those ones where I kind of kept waiting for her to be resurrected in some way. And also confusing because of the fact that her solo movie is apparently in production, which is pretty much the main reason I was kind of waiting for her to come back. So I don't know what's up with that, unless it's a prequel of sorts. It'll be a prequel that has a pretty dark cloud over it, but nevertheless, sort of like when we got Solo, shortly after we found out Han Solo's ultimate fate. It was like, well, I guess if you want to do that now, it seems weirdly timed, but okay. But obviously, the big moment. The moment that's been getting, like, from the moment I saw the movie to now, just the more I think about it, the more depressed I'm getting. And it's like, I don't know if it's because, you know, we followed the movies from the beginning of this franchise, which started with Tony, and that was the whole thing. He's been, like, our leader this whole time. He was always my personal favorite of the whole thing. I took his side in Civil War, all that. And it's this big ultimate finish. And that's the thing, too, is, yeah, Downey, back in the day, was all, I think I'm done, I think this will be my last one, I think this will be, I think Iron Man 3 will be my last one, and I think Avengers will be my last one. I think just before Homecoming happened, he was saying it was going to be his last one. There's going to be Iron Man 4, there's not going to be Iron Man 4, just all over the place. So you got Chris Evans over here saying, I'm done with Captain America. I'm never going to play him again. I've hung up the suit for good. And as far as I know, Downey's over here not saying jack shit. So I don't know who was expecting this. But here we are. And it's... Yeah. And I don't really know... Because here's the thing, is... I mean, it really, really... It's a really sad send-off. I mean, a fantastic one, for sure. But and the more you think about it, it's like the more the pieces fit together, because you've got there's the whole thing where the whole thing was about marrying Pepper, and he did get to do that, and that's kind of the depressing thing. Was I was trying to figure out my expectations for this movie, like all night last night before I went today, and I was imagining that the ending would basically be like basically all the romances coming together, and anybody that didn't have a love interest was going to be expendable, like Cap or Thor or people like that. It turns out the two major heroes that do die had love interests, so that theory's going out the window. And the fact that they kept building up the wedding in Infinity War kept making me think that Tony and Pepper's wedding was going to be the very last scene of this movie, and that'd be what we ended on. But no, it's the guy that I could have sworn was going to die. He's the one that gets the romantic last scene, which is fantastic, but I'll talk about that. But first, so Tony did get to marry Pepper. He did get to continue his lineage by having Morgan, and he did get to be a father and spend that time with her, even if it was short-lived. He got his closure with Howard. He reconciled with Steve, and they worked together to save the universe. All the pieces fit together that this was Tony's send-off. I just put those pieces together a little too late, and was hoping that he was gonna... Because I had this horrible flashback to Deadpool 2, where he kept pretending to die and then waking back up. And it was... And Tony's the kind of smartass that might pull that, especially after the... Like, maybe... I was trying to block out the Deadpool 2 thing and talk more about maybe being a callback to the end of the first Avengers movie, where Tony looks pretty dead and it just takes Hulk roaring to wake him up. And I just kind of somewhat kept waiting for that jolt that never came. And it was one of those cases where you just kind of keep waiting and wait, and then it's the funeral that makes it all set in, and you're like, oh shit, they are not turning back from this. He got the big fish funeral. Shit. With everybody there. We even had Favreau there with the daughter doing the Nicholson thing in terms of endearment. Which I'm guessing is also... They were like kind of somewhat possibly maybe alluding to another comic thing that I'm totally not versed in, that I vaguely remember hearing about, was a storyline where Pepper ends up with Happy. So maybe it was like a small, tiny bit of maybe that'll go in that direction. Obviously we won't know, but yeah, so I'm basically still trying to come to terms with the fact that we are now in an Iron Man-less movie world, which is kind of depressing, but yeah, so I just got to keep reminding myself that it's a movie, that it's a superhero franchise, but yeah, the investment that they've really got people in now just really feels like the fact that I feel this about what most people would call just a superhero movie, it says a lot about how much they pulled off here, especially with how much Downey did creating this character, for the movies anyway. And I'm trying to look at it in a bittersweet way. Like, another way I'm looking at it is, obviously, back in the day, and that's not to take away from what he did here, because like I said, actors would kill to have the meat to their characters that he's gotten to do with this. But at the same time, Downey was like a really, really diverse actor back in like the 90s, in the late 80s, and did some really interesting movies. And I'm just curious now that he won't have Iron Man to constantly come back to, if we'll get to see him do like like interesting. I'm not saying that these aren't. I'm just saying the whole. You get what I'm saying. I'm sure. I'm really interested to see what kind of decisions he'll make for his career now that he can pretty much do whatever the hell he wants. He's got all the money in the goddamn world, and this character has clearly reached a definitive end. And he's clearly an extremely talented and diverse actor. So let's see. I mean, I know they're trying to get Sherlock Holmes 3 to happen, but let's. I'm really hoping it goes more interesting than that, but we'll see what happens. Um, so yes, and then of course, Cap gets the perfect send off that is the total opposite of the send off I thought he was getting. He gets about the. I mean, yeah, there's probably some bittersweetness here, but overall, it is clearly, absolutely the most happy ending Cap could have possibly gotten, and which is perfect. But like I said, is another thing that could potentially feel like a cop out, especially since there was so much, emotional gravity to his character because of what he's been through, and the fact that he was basically able to undo that and live the life that he could have from the start. But it just feels perfect, like in every possible sense. So yeah, I mean, I'm curious where Bucky is in that timeline, but regardless, once again, that's the whole time travel thing. Where if you overthink it, you're gonna miss out on the really, really good stuff that's right here. So yeah, that's still like really emotionally powerful. So it's got that going for it. And lastly, one more thing that I thought was really satisfying that they didn't really draw much attention to was we never saw Vision in this movie once, like not in flashback or anything. You could tell in Infinity War he was done for good. He has to be because of the stones, but we never even got a glimpse of him. But at the same time, I feel like Vision got like the perfect justice because there's the really emotionally shattering moment in Infinity War where Wanda has to watch Vision die twice, where she has to do it herself, and then Thanos goes back and then does it in front of her all over again. And the fact that, much like Vision, we got to watch Thanos die twice. We got to see it once, and then all over again in a different fashion. So it's almost like, even though he was not present at all, and he was referenced like twice, I feel like Vision really won out there. So that was really satisfying also. So yeah. So that's what it is. Obviously, we have. It's to my understanding they've said this is absolutely the end of Avengers movies, like Avengers movies, despite the fact that we know we're gonna have Far From Home, Guardians 3, Black Panther 2. So they need to do another Doctor Strange because I really want them to resolve that fucking Chiwetel storyline that was in the post-credits scene. I hate that that's still open. But yeah, so and that I don't know what the hell the Black Widow movie is now, but I guess we'll see what happens. But it's to my understanding, I guess, that they're meant to be like I think they said specifically this isn't like the start of another phase. It's just the franchises will just kind of continue by themselves or something. So we'll see how far those go, and then I wonder what they'll do. But it appears that Iron Man and Cap are done for good, so we'll see where that goes. I also don't know if this means Thor is officially in Guardians now. And that's really interesting that if that's the case, that's something that hasn't slipped out yet, because they tell us fucking everything anymore in regards to like who's in what anyway. Or we just know, like, we knew the Snap people were coming back and stuff like that, but still there's always those surprises, like how shocked I was to see Robert Redford again. So yeah, I mean, I'm trying to figure out if there's anything left to be desired here in regards to this movie by itself, and that's it just about wraps like everything up. And like I said, the way it really shows, like, it's almost like it's a love letter to its own franchise with the whole time travel aspect and getting to see all that stuff again, and then the way all their characters kind of get like these big moments in one way or another. And it's so yeah, it's just about as big and epic as we could have possibly asked for. I think we get just about everything individually that we could ask for in it. And we get to leave in a fucking ball of tears and all that. And and see what they're going to do with some of the remaining characters and go from there. So, that's, I guess, pretty much all I can really say about that. So, it's going to get really, like, much calmer as we go on to the other two movies that are just basically an afterthought after something like that. So, real quick, let's talk about the Curse of La Llorona. After everything that happened in Endgame, Linda Cardellini and her kids are in trouble all over again. So, great. So, this is another one of the many horror movies we've gotten this year, and it's only the end of April. But there's like a whole slew of them this entire year, I think. And given some of the ones we've seen, like Us, for instance, and I actually was fine with Pet Sematary. It seems to be getting more and more hate as it exists, but I was fine with it. And this clearly is gonna just come and go and probably be forgotten. Probably about as quickly forgotten as The Nun was, for instance. I mean, so it does begin, and we do have a somewhat artfully done opening scene that eventually leads to what we know is happening, where we get the background of La Llorona before she's the vengeful ghost, and that is drowning her children in spite of her husband and then herself. And it's nice enough. What I do like that it's like usually in movies like this you expect like the jump scare opening, and this really isn't that. It's basically done like the Michelle Williams scene, the similar Michelle Williams scene in Shutter Island, basically. Which might give it more hope than it actually deserves. And then we jump ahead like 300 years to 1973, because we're doing the Conjuring timeline, I guess. And for some reason they wanted to set up the time frame by using Superfly, of all things, while we have this sitcom scene of Linda Cardellini and her kids running around while she tries to get them to school on time while she's trying to get to work on time at the same time. And it suddenly forgot it was a horror movie, I guess, and it wanted to be this, 90s sitcom or whatever. But, then we get the backstory that her husband was a cop who died on the job, and it's just her and the kids by themselves, which basically feels like the screenwriter saying, I gave them a backstory so that you wouldn't get mad at me for them not having a backstory. There's really no other reason for them to have a backstory, but you can't say it's not in there. So it sort of continues on this vibe that maybe they won't do the jump scare thing that much, which is nice. So we've got that, and there's even like a quiet scene towards the beginning when the woman says, listen, and we listen really carefully, and when you expect something to jump out or something to scream in our face, nothing happens. And it's like genuinely suspenseful. But this is really, really short-lived. So, because it has to be the movie it advertises itself as, I guess. So we do have a somewhat interesting thing going on here, where we have, obviously, Lena Hurley works with the whole child welfare thing, so we've got the woman that she knows with the children who are being stalked by La Llorona. But the thing here is that after they're attacked, the kids really not helpfully just keep using the pronoun she. So instead of thinking it's the ghost, everybody just assumes, oh, the mother, they're afraid of the mother. Well, okay. It's like, well, you probably could have... I feel like those kids could have done a little more to make it not seem like the mother was doing this, but whatever. And then once this happens, is when it does kind of turn into a jump scare marathon. But then there's also this whole thing where the reason that is because of the interactions that the ghost has with the people it's scaring. Feel like they're really damn early. Like, it feels like we had a couple of nice is probably a strong word, but a couple of scenes that didn't completely suck and didn't completely make you say, oh, this movie's going to be terrible right away. But then it eventually just turns into, we've got to get the ghost on screen as much as we possibly can, doing the whole scaring people thing. Even if it's the main characters and there's really no particular stakes because we know nothing's going to happen to the main characters that soon. So, and then the face of it. The face of the ghost is revealed kind of ridiculously early, too. And not only does it kind of take the threat away pretty quickly when you just full on. I mean, there's like, say you've got the ghost in the black veil in Insidious, where the very first shot of the movie is seeing its face, but there's still like a dark shroud in it, where we see it, but we don't see it enough to where it feels like it's given away. It's enough to where when we see it, it's startling and remains startling. But here, we just kind of see the full-on face, like less than half an hour in. And yeah. So, and it's not a particularly, terrifying face. It's not like Valak's face or something. Like, I still see fucking Valak's face in my fucking nightmares. That's not gonna be the case with, La Llorona. Actually, her face is scarier on the poster than it is in the movie. Whatever that means to you. I mean, so there is gonna be something, I guess, inherently here, that you don't typically see in movies like this, and that is the fact that, it goes specifically after children. Like, outside of it, these movies try so hard to be as mainstream as possible. They're not gonna be just dropping children left and right, usually. So the fact that that's like the ghost's sole purpose is an interesting setup, but doesn't pull it off in near as much of a ballsy way as it probably set up for. And there's like every now and then there's the scene where like the scene in the hallway in the hospital where she's stalking the kids, and like there's like there's like eerie lighting going on and everything, and like there's kind of somewhat potential for something there, but it never comes through in a really effective way. So and then also not even half an hour in, we're doing the whole cliche of getting the ghost's backstory, where she goes to a priest, because it's always a fucking priest, and we get the whole layout. And then later on, this same priest, I think, gives us background to basically shoehorn itself into the Conjuring universe by this being the same priest from the first Annabelle movie, the shitty Annabelle movie. So that's great. I think it was the first Annabelle movie, but either way, yeah, it basically said like it's clearly a line they like wrote in long after the fact, where it's like all it took was like writing one line and voila, you're in the Conjuring universe now. Despite the fact that I am sure this will have nothing to do with any of that other stuff. I was thinking I saw like the painting of Valak in the background of a scene, but that might have also just been weird lighting. I can't tell the difference sometimes. So there is that. So you talk about them doing the backstory that early, and you're like, okay, are they just getting it out of the way? Maybe, to get to the point. But then you have to question, okay, then what is the point? Like, if they're trying to get everything as out of the way as possible to get to the good stuff, what is the good stuff? Like, what is it that we're rushing to get to? And it's the shit you're expecting. I didn't see the trailers for this, but it's probably all the stuff in the trailers if I had to guess. There is one moment where the girl has one of those clear umbrellas, and she, like, opens it, and the ghost is just there, like, its figure is there. And it doesn't charge, and there's no music, there's no sound. She just opens the umbrella, and she looks out it, and the figure is there. And you're like, oh, okay, that's effective. But the thing is I don't know if it was genuinely startling, or if I was just impressed that it didn't fuck it up by using a big sound effect or big music or something. And it's like, where are we if I'm going to applaud this movie for not doing the fuck up we totally expected it to do, that it will do in quick succession many times over throughout the rest of the movie? This one moment is the anomaly. So, I don't know how much. Because I would, and dare I even speak this movie's name while I'm talking about the Curse of La Llorona, but it somewhat kind of vaguely reminded me of the across the lake scene in The Innocents. Just a tiny, tiny bit. Just for that little second. But then it finds other ways to fuck itself up and get bigger and louder. In this very scene, even, just later on. So, yeah, so it's like anytime it kind of... The very few times it seems to remotely have potential, it's really quick to just sort of shit it away. To the point that this isn't even a movie that I, like, get pissed off watching or talking about. Because it just pretty much does everything you expect it to. Which can be incredibly annoying and incredibly infuriating, but here it's just so, like, not giving a fuck. Like, just, there's just no effort into the making of this movie, really. That there's just not really a whole lot else to add. So, that's basically what it is, and it's really to a point now where these damn priest characters, it's like, how far away does The Exorcist feel? And I think I just, there was that Possession movie that came out in, like, December, where I feel like I said this exact same thing, where it's like, how far away does The Exorcist feel that horror movies where one of the major characters is a priest is just fucking boring now? Where it's like, when it's just the priest doing priest shit, it's like, this movie could not end soon enough. And it's like, remember when that was, like, the end-all be-all of horror? Was shit like that. And now it's just so damn, like, run-of-the-mill and shit. I don't know what to do with it when it's in front of me, except just wait for it to end. And that's all it gives me. So, yeah, and then there's the whole thing, you know, as it goes on, and they kind of try to explain what's going on, but kind of not really when it starts happening to all of them, when Linda Cardellini starts seeing it. And it's like, whenever it grabs her kid's arms, it leaves burn marks. And so it's like, and then when, you know, child welfare is going to come, and Sean Patrick Thomas is going to come, and he's going to say, like, you know, oh, how did you get those burn marks? Burn marks! And the kids are like, I fell down. And it's like, well, here's the thing. So Linda Cardellini knows that it's a ghost, and it happens to her, so she knows that if the ghost touches her, that there's burn marks. So she knows that's what's on the kid's arms. So she works in child welfare herself, and she doesn't think to say, oh, by the way, if anybody should ask about those, we should totally come up with a purpose that doesn't make me look like I'm burning you. But no, I'll just leave that to you to figure out when police come to the house to interrogate us. It's like, oh, it's not like we're ever gonna go out in fucking public again with you looking like that. But, yeah, so, not sure how she kept her job for as long as she did, but, okay, when she's not able to find herself out of those situations, there's something wrong, I think, but, whatever. So, yeah, that's pretty much it. Like, there's one or two effective scenes towards the end. The bathtub scene is kind of freaky, and there's a kind of freaky scene when they're under the table and they can hear the ghost on top of it, like, looking for them and shit. But they have nowhere to run because they're under a fucking table. So, yeah, but I mean, that stuff is one feels so far away from the other, and this movie is only like an hour and a half. And like I said, it's really just the same old basic bullshit that just forced itself into the Annabelle universe, thus forcing itself into the Conjuring universe, thus thinking it's brought it some credibility to itself, which it hasn't. It's just another one of these movies. You'll get exactly what you're expecting. It'll end, and you'll probably never think about it again. So that's what that is. And a waste of potential, too, because to my understanding, that legend has, like, a whole lot, like, potential behind it. But this is the movie that we got. So, movie set in 1973 that might as well be in present day. There's no reason it's not in present day except to fit the timeline, and for them to put Superfly in it, because that's the song I think of when I think of families running to school. This is where we are in horror now. So let's end really quick on Missing Link, which is a movie that I probably would have watched sooner, except I swear I kept forgetting it was Leica. Leica, who brought us Coraline, Paranorman, Cuba and the Two Strings, and the Box Trolls, which would be a stellar lineup from anybody. So the box trolls I wasn't as much in love with as those other three, but I mean those other three are like, yeah. But the thing here is that this is a movie where you look at those other movies I mentioned, and you'll notice that not only are they really funny and not only are they really creative, but their stories have like a whole lot of interesting layers and things going on, and goes in these interesting creative directions and all that. And clearly, with this plot, this one's going to be a lot more straightforward as far as story goes, where it's just Hugh Jackman is the explorer slash hunter slash whatever you want to call him, who's looking out for all those legendary creatures. With the first scene is him hunting down the Loch Ness monster and having a humorous run-in with it, and then ultimately being told to track down Bigfoot or Sasquatch or Susan or whatever you want to call him. um, and then obviously when they meet, they become friends. They strike a deal, and then his ex-girlfriend Zoe Saldana comes into the mix. And we just keep coming back to Avengers. We've got ex-girlfriends played by Zoe Saldana. We've got troubled wives with children played by Linda Cardellini. But it's all always coming back. So once that goes, though, it's really not too long before he and I guess we'll just call it. He names himself Susan like halfway through the movie, but I know the advertisements are really going into that. And yes, completely and totally childish as it is, it's kind of always funny when they call him Susan, whether he calls himself that, whether it's in a humorous context or whether it's in a serious context, and sometimes it is. Sometimes it's in a hectic context. Sometimes it's in the middle of action scenes. Sometimes it's in life or death situations, and somehow it's always funny. I don't know if it's completely and totally appropriate for some of those more dramatic moments, but it's always there. So it's like they didn't turn back on it, so I'll give them that. But talking about the story, like I said, pretty straightforward. So the thing to really look at here is not just the humor and character, which is really big also, and they really handle really well in that perfect sort of Lego way that they do. But also talking about the Lego way, the way that it looks, and knowing that it's almost entirely like self-built things, like the whole like I think there's like maybe like some of like the really background locations are like CGI or something, but everything that we really see like up close is its own individual real life thing that is actually there. And I like that they've kept up the tradition of sort of showing us things during the credits that show just how this really came to life. Like some of the stuff we see in Kubo, like the giant, is just really, it's like unbelievable with that stuff is like actually here and being filmed as a real thing as opposed to just being animated. Because when you look at the story and you look at the characters, it would have been very easy to just make this some DreamWorks movie or some Disney animation movie or something. But when you go in aware of like the love and attention to detail that Lego puts in all their movies and all the really, really precise things here, especially the locations in this one especially are like feel so incredibly big, and so various as they go from one to the other. It's just spectacular in this indescribable way. I've noticed, especially when I talked about Kubo a few years ago, I have a hard time even like talking about Lego movies in regards to how I feel about them, because it's really just you just kind of have to see it to really understand exactly how much went into it and how much there is to admire about it. And I've always found difficulty talking about them for some reason. It's probably why I haven't reviewed Coraline yet, when Coraline is like one of the best animated movies maybe ever. There is that. But as far as like the voice work goes, obviously Jackman is here pretty much, playing it straight to a sense. He's playing it straight when you look at the fact that his I guess scene partner here, I guess you would say, is a Sasquatch voiced by Zach Galifianakis. He seems like he'd be the straight main character. But there's still, Jackman really finds that humor in his arrogance and just really makes it larger than life in this hilarious way. And then, of course, you got Galifianakis as Susan, which is another case where it's like, I remember a time where casting Galifianakis in a part like this would have just kind of been annoying. But as the years have gone on and we've seen just how truly talented Galifianakis is, and not just, you know, Alan from The Hangover or something like that, um, I've really grown to appreciate kind of the diversity of what he can do, which for a while there didn't look like he had. It kind of seemed like he had one particular character. But here, there's like so much he's able to bring to this character just through his voice work, and how much it fits. It's one of those cases where it's kind of hard to imagine any other voice to this character, and it just works so perfectly, especially with the way he's able to deliver certain lines and all that, and really play up the literal attitude of the character. Because there's a lot of that um, when they're going through and they're doing some of the more like the individual situations they find themselves in. The movie kind of starts to have a real Fantastic Mr. Fox feel, and the way that he's able to sort of bring that sort of sense of humor to this character, that otherwise would just seem like maybe dopey in another movie. But like I said, there feels like a real love behind the creation of these characters, and not just in their physical creation, but also in the voice work that really comes through. So there's that, and then there's like the really unconventional casting of Timothy Olyphant, where he's the villain, but when you think of Timothy Olyphant, you think of like maybe a suave dude that maybe has a certain evil look to him. And it's just like this short, sort of Jackie Earle Haley looking dude that's like really like if Jackie Earle Haley was like even shorter, is this dude, and he's almost like I think it'd be going overboard to say he's a Yosemite Sam type, but he's on his way there. um, and somehow, Oliment's voice is like perfect for this character, and you would have never seen that coming to look at the guy, which is great. There's also another villain that hires him that I'm pretty sure is Stephen Fry. So we've got a really great voice cast here. But like I said, it's really all in the animation and the humor of it, and also talking about some of the more like hectic scenes and the fact that the movie does have like action scenes in it, as it were. But the great thing about it and stuff, especially like the chase scene in Paranorman comes to mind, where it's like usually in these more hectic or action oriented scenes is when animated movies tend to get dumber, if they're that type of movie. But the fact that there's so many moments in these action scenes that are like so inspired, where it's just like there's a particular physical altercation with a guy with a really durable stomach, and how this plays out throughout in various ways. Is just all so well put together, so meticulously. It's fantastic and also hilarious at the same time, if need be. Um, so yeah, so it's got to be so like if it's gonna be thin on the story, it's still got to be really funny, and it's still got to have that creativity, and it's still got to have that charm, and you can clearly see all the talent that went into it. So yeah, I obviously don't love it the way I would love something like Coraline or Cuba or to an extent Paranorman, but yes, it's still very entertaining and very charming. So that's what that is. What you basically come to expect from like even if like I said the story isn't as creative, it does its best to make up for that in what it does give us. So yeah, that's what those are. Next week, I think I'm gonna finally do that catching up on 2019 movies. It's gonna have like 15 movies on it. I've been seeing for like the past month sporadically, and then I'm just gonna talk about all of them at once in one video, just kind of down the line. So then there's already a new Twilight Zone that's come along. I'm 3 behind, so I'll probably do all those 3 in one Twilight Zone video also. There's a versus I've prepared that I haven't shot yet, but that'll be coming too. I'll just once I get my shit together, we'll see what happens. So until that, I think that's it.